Emily, your wedding is tomorrow. What
I
happened?
don't know if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. If I walk down that aisle tomorrow, I'll spend the rest of
My life wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen you instead.
then stay on the phone until I really am. I've spent months planning a perfect wedding, but not once did I ask myself if
If it was the right marriage.
I know my answer.
The night Claire called him from the parking lot of the church where she was supposed to get married in 11 hours, Owen realized he had spent 12 years being careful about the wrong thing. He was 41 years old. He ran a small woodworking shop out of a rented unit on the edge of town. Custom furniture, mostly, a few restoration jobs. He had been divorced for 3 years from a woman who had called him emotionally unavailable, and then immediately moved in with a man who cried at commercials, which Owen figured said something about compatibility that neither of them had understood while they were still trying. He lived in a house that was slightly too big for one person and slightly too small for two, which suited the situation perfectly. He was not lonely, exactly. He was more the way an unfinished shelf looks when it's still missing its last coat. Functional, just not quite done. Claire Merritt had been his best friend since they were 22. She had talked him into every job he ever took, and out of every job he ever regretted. And she had stood in the second row at his wedding and cried in a way that he had always assumed was because she was happy for him. He had not examined that assumption carefully. He had a habit, he now recognized, of not examining certain things too closely when examining them might require him to do something about what he found. She called at 11:17 on a Friday night. He was in the workshop sanding a corner joint that had come out 3 degrees off square, which was the kind of mistake that only bothers you if you know it's there, and Owen always knew when something was off. He answered on the second ring because it was Claire, and he always answered on the second ring when it was Claire. "Hey," he said. There was a beat, the particular kind of pause that contains an entire speech that hasn't been decided on yet. He could hear parking lot sounds, wind on a microphone, the faint click of a car door that hadn't latched properly. "I need you to talk me out of this," she said, "or into something else. I genuinely don't know which one I'm asking for." He set down the sanding block. "Where are you?" "St. Andrew's parking lot." The rehearsal dinner just ended. Garrett is at the hotel with his family. Owen knew about Garrett. He knew the shape of Garrett the way you know the shape of furniture you've lived around but never sat in. Garrett was an architect from Portland who wore the kind of watch that came in its own wooden case and who always talked about Claire's laugh in a way that sounded like a compliment but landed like a mild critique, as though her laugh were an endearing flaw he had agreed to tolerate. Claire had been engaged to him for 14 months. The wedding was at 2 p.m. the following day. "Are you cold?" Owen asked. Another pause. "Why does that matter?" "Because if you're cold, you're going to want to go back inside eventually, and I want to know how much time we have." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "A little cold. My wrap's in the car." "Get your wrap." He heard her move. The click of the car door again, this time with purpose. A rustling sound. Then she came back, and her voice was slightly muffled and more settled, the way voices get when a person stops bracing against the temperature. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. "Tell me what's happening." She told him the whole thing standing in a church parking lot in a peacock blue wrap and heels she hadn't broken in properly, and Owen listened the way he always listened to Claire, completely, without interrupting, which was a skill he had developed over 12 years because Claire thought while she talked and interrupting her before she arrived somewhere was like stopping a sentence in the middle of a word. You had to wait. The sentence always went somewhere. She had been having a feeling, she said. Not a dramatic feeling. Not a "this is wrong" alarm going off. More like a low persistent frequency, the way certain fluorescent lights hum at a pitch that most people don't notice, but some people can't not hear. She had been hearing that hum for about 4 months. She had assumed it was nerves. She had assumed it was the normal terror of a permanent decision. She had gone to exactly 1 therapy session about it, and the therapist had validated her feelings, and her feelings had not gone anywhere, which Claire said was not very useful. And tonight at dinner, she said, Garrett's mother made a toast. How was the toast? She called me Garrett's compass. Owen waited. She meant it as a compliment, Claire said. She literally used the word compliment. She said, I mean this as the highest compliment. Claire has always been Garrett's true north, his compass, the thing that orients him. And I was sitting there smiling, and I was thinking, I don't want to be someone's compass. I want to be someone's destination. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, somewhere far off, a dog was barking at something it would never catch. Owen said, That's a real sentence you just said. I know, she said. You should write that down. I did. I texted it to myself immediately. Garrett thought I was texting my mom. Owen leaned back against the workbench. The wood was cool against his shoulder blades. The lamp above the bench threw a warm yellow circle down onto the unfinished shelf, and he could see, even in that light, where the corner joint was 3 degrees off. What do you need from me, Claire? I don't know. I think I need you to tell me what you see. From outside. Because I've been inside this for 14 months, and I think I've lost the outside view. He was quiet for a moment. You want the honest one, or the kind one? Owen. Right, he exhaled. Honest one, then. He told her what he saw. He did it the way he did most things, slowly, without drama, in the order the pieces went together. He had seen her with Garrett at maybe a dozen occasions over the 14 months, and what he had noticed was not that she was unhappy, exactly, but that she was careful in a way she wasn't usually careful. Claire was not a careful person. She was warm and quick, and she talked over herself when she got excited, and she had a habit of saying exactly what she thought 2 seconds before she decided whether she should. But with Garrett, she was edited. Considered, she smiled a beat after the funny thing instead of during it, which meant she was checking first whether it was appropriate to find it funny. That might be me just being mature, she said. It might be, he agreed. But you don't think so. I think there's a difference between being mature and being managed. She was quiet for long enough that he could hear the wind again, and the distant traffic, and the sound of her breathing steadily through a feeling that was apparently confirming something she already knew. He doesn't do it on purpose, she said. I know. He's a good person. I know that too. Being managed by a good person is still, he said. The single word sat between them. Sometimes in 12 years of friendship, you develop a shorthand where a word can hold the weight of a paragraph and still held all of it, still its own thing, still a problem. Still something that doesn't go away because the person doing it has good intentions. Okay, she said, and her voice had shifted slightly. Firmer. Okay, what do I do? That, he said, is not a question I can answer for you. Owen, I mean it. It's not mine to answer. Then why did you pick up the phone at 11:17 on a Friday? He almost said because it's you. He caught it, filed it, set it somewhere back and to the left of where he was currently standing, and did not look directly at it. Because you needed someone to talk to, he said. And I'm the someone. There was a silence that felt different from the earlier silences. Less searching. More like a person who has found the thing they came for and is deciding whether to pick it up. Can I come over? She asked. She arrived 32 minutes later, still in the peacock blue wrap and the not quite broken in heels, and Owen met her at the door with a mug of coffee that was mostly milk because that was how she drank it, and she stood in his kitchen under the overhead light, looking like a woman who had walked through a decision and come out the other side still slightly damp from it. You made coffee, she said. You sounded cold. She set her bag down on the counter and wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at him over the rim in a way she had looked at him thousands of times in 12 years, which was directly and without calculation, which was the thing about Claire that had always been the thing about Claire. You have sawdust on your collar, she said. I was working when you called, at 11 at night. The joint was off. Of course it was. She sat down on the bar stool at the kitchen island. The kitchen was small and warm, with the window above the sink still dark and the overhead light making everything feel closer than it was. There was a paint mark on the baseboard from when he'd done the walls 2 summers ago and missed a strip, and he had never fixed it because it didn't bother him once he got used to it. Claire had pointed it out the first time she'd been over after the renovation, and then never mentioned it again, which he had always appreciated. She said, "Can I ask you something? After tonight, I feel like I should be nervous." She looked at him. "You probably should." A pause. "Are you always this careful?" He thought about the corner joint that was 3 degrees off. He thought about assumptions he had not examined, because examining them would require him to do something about what he found. "Depends what I'm trying not to break," he said. She didn't answer right away. When she looked back at him, her expression had shifted in a way that was specific and legible, and that he had to work. Briefly, not to look away from. "Well," she said. "For the record, I'm not made of glass." They talked until 1 a.m. They talked about Garrett, and then they stopped talking about Garrett, and they talked about other things, the shop, and a restoration job Owen had on a 1940s sideboard that was the color of old honey, and Claire's job as a translator for a documentary company, and the trip to Portugal they had planned once in 2019 and then unmade because the timing was wrong, and the timing had kept being wrong, and they had never rescheduled it, and Claire said suddenly, at 12:47 in the morning on the night before her wedding, "We should have gone to Portugal." "We should have," he said. "Why didn't we?" "Timing. The timing was never going to get right on its own," she said. "That's not how timing works. Someone has to decide." He looked at her across the kitchen island. The overhead light was warm, and the window above the sink showed nothing but dark, and the coffee mugs were empty, and there was a particular quality to the air in the kitchen at 12:47 in the morning that was different from any other air Owen had breathed in recent memory. "Someone has to decide," he agreed. She was looking at him with the same directness she had been looking at him for 12 years, but there was something added to it now that had perhaps always been there in a form too small to register until this particular night in this particular kitchen, with the overhead light making everything feel closer than it was. "Owen," she said. "Yeah, why have you never," she stopped, "started differently? All these years. You never once, no? Why not?" He thought about saying something careful. He thought about the way he'd been careful for 12 years about exactly this, stepping around it like a corner joint he'd measured to be off, and then chosen to sand over rather than fix properly. "Because you were always in the middle of something," he said, "and I didn't want to be one more complication. That's not a real reason." "No," he said, "it's not." She was quiet. Outside, the wind had stopped. The kitchen was so still that he could hear the refrigerator cycling. He could hear, very faintly, the sound of her breathing. "What's the real reason?" she asked. "The real reason," he said, "is that losing you would be worse than not having you. And saying something meant risking the first thing to get the second thing, and I've never been willing to make that trade." She set down her empty mug, very precisely, with both hands, as though it required attention. "That is," she said, "the most Owen thing you have ever said to me." "I know. It's also," she said, "exactly why." He looked at her. "Exactly why what?" he asked, though he thought he knew. He was almost certain he knew. She stood up from the bar stool. She came around the kitchen island, and she stopped with perhaps a foot of warm kitchen air between them, and she looked at him the way she had been looking at him since 2012, except without the layer of careful that had been over it this whole time, the layer now simply gone. "Exactly why I called you," she said, "at 11:17 from a church parking lot, the night before my wedding." He held very still. He was good at holding very still. "Claire, don't be careful," she said. "Not right now. Just for a minute." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, which had come loose somewhere between the parking lot and his kitchen, and she turned her face slightly into his hand in a movement so small it was almost nothing. And then it was not nothing at all. "Are you trying not to kiss me?" she asked. "Extremely hard," he said. "Stop trying," she said. So he did. She did not go to the wedding. She made one phone call at 7 in the morning, sitting in Owen's kitchen in a borrowed flannel shirt and yesterday's peacock blue wrap folded over the back of the bar stool. The call was short. Garrett was not surprised in the way that people sometimes aren't surprised when a thing happens that they had been quietly, privately expecting. He was hurt, which was fair. He was dignified about the hurt, which was also fair, and which Claire told Owen afterward was actually the most Garrett thing Garrett had ever done, and she said it with real respect and real grief both, and Owen did not try to remove either of those things, because they were both correct. She called her mother next. That call was longer. He made eggs. 3 weeks later, a mutual friend of theirs named Derek called Owen and told him that some people in their shared social circle felt that Owen had played a role in the situation that was, in Derek's words, not entirely appropriate. Owen listened to all of this. When Derek was done, Owen said, "I've known Claire for 12 years. She made her own decision at 7 in the morning before I'd said a word she hadn't asked me to say. Does that clarify anything?" Derek said it clarified quite a bit. The conversation ended. It was the kind of conversation Owen had learned long ago not to win loudly. 6 months after that, Owen finished the 1940s sideboard. Claire came by the shop to see it. She ran her hand along the restored surface, which had come out the color of old honey, which was exactly what it was supposed to be, and she said, "This is the best thing you've made." "It was already made," he said. "I just fixed what was off." She looked at him sideways. "Are we still talking about the sideboard?" "We can be," he said. She smiled, not a beat after, during, the way she smiled when she hadn't checked first. He rented out the extra bedroom in the house that was too big for one person and slightly too small for two. Claire moved in 6 months after that, which meant the house was now exactly the right size for two people who had known each other for 12 years and had spent approximately 11 and a half of those years being careful about the wrong thing. They went to Portugal the following spring. The timing was not right. They went anyway. Someone had to decide. On a Tuesday morning in September, almost 2 years after the phone call, Owen drove Claire to a farmer's market 4 miles from the house to pick up a lamp she'd found from a vendor who sold repurposed nautical equipment. They walked back through the market with the lamp wrapped in newspaper and a bag of peaches they hadn't planned to buy. And the morning was the color of everything being exactly where it was supposed to be, which is a color Owen had not seen very often until lately. Somewhere between the cheese stall and the parking lot, he stopped walking. She stopped too. Turned to look at him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. He looked at her in the morning light with the newspaper-wrapped lamp under her arm and the bag of peaches and her hair doing the thing it did when she hadn't given it enough attention, which he had come to think of as its natural state. Just checking. Checking what? That this is what it looks like from the outside. He said, "I wanted to get the outside view." She remembered. He could see that she remembered. "And?" she said. "And it looks right," he said. "From the outside. It looks exactly right." She stood up on her toes and kissed him on the cheek, which she did sometimes in the middle of ordinary moments when he wasn't bracing for it, which was when it landed best. They went home. He made coffee. She talked over herself about the lamp. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, all the way to where the sentence was going. He had not, in 2 years, once had to work not to look at her. He figured that was the outside view of what right looked like. Sometimes careful is just fear with better manners. Owen had been careful for 11 and a half years. And then one night at 11:17 he had picked up the phone, and he had listened, and he had said the honest thing instead of the kind one, and it had turned out that the honest thing was the kindest thing he had ever done. Not for her. For both of them. What would you have done if your closest friend called you the night before their wedding and said those words? And have you ever spent years being careful about the wrong thing, and then one moment made you realize what you'd been protecting yourself from all along? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.